All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving into a really short but honestly pretty unsettling parable from the Gospel of Matthew. It's a story about this incredible party that has a terrifying ending. It's just 4 verses, but it makes you ask some really big questions about what it means to enter the kingdom of heaven. So here we are in Matthew chapter 22, verse 11. Picture this. A massive royal wedding feast is going on. The hall is just packed with people from every walk of life. But then the king comes in to survey the celebration, and his eyes lock onto one guy, one man who stands out for all the wrong reasons. And that one little detail is about to change everything.
So you've got this whole room, right? It's buzzing with celebration, and yet this one guest suddenly becomes the absolute focus of the story. His presence is just off. It's a disruption to this otherwise perfect scene, and the king zeroes right in on him. You can just feel the tension ratchet up.
Now we get to verse 12. The king walks up and he asks this very simple, direct question. He even calls the man friend, but the man's response, or, his lack of a response, that's the real kicker. He's completely speechless. Why? Because he has no excuse, absolutely no defense. This isn't just some awkward moment. It's basically a silent confession.
That silence, it tells you everything you need to know. This isn't the kind of fumbling silence of someone who just made an innocent mistake and got caught off guard. Nope. This is the silence of someone who knows deep down they have no justification for what they've done. It tells us that not having the garment, that was a choice, not just some accident.
And this is the big question, right? This is the central puzzle of the whole parable. The verses right before this one tell us that these guests were literally rounded up from the streets. The Bible says both bad and good. So how on earth could the king hold this guy accountable for what he was wearing? Figuring this out is the key to the entire story.
Okay, so what happens next in verse 13 is, it's pretty shocking. The consequence for this silent defiance isn't just, hey, could you please leave? No way. The man is bound, hand and foot, and thrown into outer darkness, a place of weeping and gnashing of teeth. The punishment seems incredibly severe for what looks like a simple dress code violation.
Yeah, that punishment is so intense, it pretty much confirms what we were already thinking. This was not a simple fashion mistake. The king isn't just some host who's mad about his party. He's acting as a righteous judge, and this feast, clearly, represents something way more important than just a wedding.
And that language, outer darkness, weeping and gnashing of teeth, it's not a coincidence. Jesus uses these exact phrases elsewhere to describe the final judgment. So this parallel is completely intentional. It tells us this isn't just a story about a party, it's a story about where we stand ultimately before the King of Heaven.
So if the punishment is that big of a deal, then the crime must be too. To really get what this man did wrong, we have to figure out what that wedding garment actually represents. It is the absolute key to unlocking this whole parable.
And this is where a little bit of historical context just blows the whole thing wide open. See, back then, it was actually customary for a king throwing a huge feast to provide the proper garments for all of his guests. It was a generous act that made sure even the poorest person pulled in off the street could be dressed honorably. And that changes everything, doesn't it? The man didn't lack a garment because he couldn't get one. He lacked a garment because he refused the one the king freely offered him. It was a deliberate insult.
So you see, the garment isn't just about looking nice for the party. It's this huge symbol. It represents a righteousness that comes from God, not something we can ever make or earn ourselves. To put on that garment is to accept the king's provision for salvation, to accept being cleansed and transformed.
In this idea, this metaphor, it's not something Jesus just made up on the spot. If you go way back to the Old Testament, the prophet Isaiah used this exact same imagery centuries before, describing how God clothes his people with garments of salvation and a robe of righteousness. It's a really well-established idea.
And then, fast forward to the New Testament, and boom, there it is again. In the book of Revelation, the clean white clothes worn at the great wedding supper of the Lamb are explicitly called the righteousness of saints. The connection could not be clearer.
So what we're really talking about here, with this guy, is someone who is more than happy to accept the invitation to the kingdom, but he refuses the inner change that has to go along with it. He wants all the benefits of the feast, the joy, the community, being with the king, but he wants it on his own terms, still clinging to his own life, his own filthy garments.
And all of this leads us right to the powerful final line of the parable, verse 14. It's a phrase you've probably heard a million times. For many are called, but few are chosen. And it can feel a little mysterious, but once you understand what that garment symbolizes, the meaning becomes crystal clear.
So let's really dig into what this famous phrase means right here in the context of our story. Because it's not about some arbitrary selection process. It's all about the required response.
Think of it like this. The call, that's the big, open, universal invitation of God's grace. It goes out to absolutely everyone, both bad and good, just like the parable says. But the chosen, well, those are the people who respond to that call the right way. They're the ones who humbly say yes to the king's terms and put on that garment of righteousness that he provides for free.
So when you get right down to it, the reason this man was kicked out had nothing to do with the king being unfair. The king provided everything he needed to belong. The man's removal from that feast was a direct result of his own proud choice to reject the king's gift.
And when you look at it that way, this whole little story is basically a perfect picture of the gospel message. Step 1, the invitation goes out to everyone. Step 2, the king provides the way to be made ready, the garment of Christ's righteousness. And step 3, our only job is to humbly accept that gift and be changed by it.
But this isn't just some old story that stays in the past, you know? It's designed to hold a mirror up to every single person who hears it. It forces a moment of really honest self-examination, kind of like the one Jesus' own disciples had at the Last Supper when they found out a betrayer was sitting right there with them.
Because the final, penetrating question of this parable isn't really about that nameless guy at a feast thousands of years ago. It's about us, right here, right now. The question becomes, Lord, is it I? Am I trying to get into the kingdom on my own terms? Am I holding on to my own self-righteousness? Or have I humbly, gratefully, put on the perfect garment that the King provides?